Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Yath Prem, a medical student at UCL, designer, content creator around self-development and self-improvement, mindful productivity, and design. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dustin. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, we were both really excited about it. This is a show by PolyInnovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hello, hello everyone. Hopefully I can provide something of use to you guys today. I'm quite excited for all the questions Dustin has prepared or what we'll talk about today. But yeah, let's go. Let's see how I can help you guys.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. Yeah. Well, I was really excited when I saw you. I thought, like, okay, this guy's interesting. He has a lot of different things going on, definitely exemplifying those multidisciplinary traits. And I was like, okay, he's creating content that's helping people and actually having value. So I was like, okay, let's bring him on and see if we can collaborate, that kind of thing. So the way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Oh, interesting. I'd say one thing that no one really knows, or I think one thing that I keep sort of like to myself is the way I learned design is really sort of, I would say, unorthodox in the sense that I never really went to any formal design courses. I never really studied any design app in very much detail. And even to this day, I do a lot of client work and I don't know how to use many of the apps in like the most professional ways, or like, Photoshop, I'll use it, but then I might take a backhand approach to do something that's very simple because that's just the way I've learned things. And that's worked for me. I've contracted client work several times over, and no one's really picked up on the fact that I've had a really backhanded approach to learning design. Um, and yeah, I think that mainly comes from when I first started to learn design. I was a student in high school. So as you can imagine, I didn't really have access to like really expensive softwares or,
Mm,
access to like just go on like Skillshare or anything at like that point in time, which is a long time ago,
yeah.
to learn things. So I had to always just YouTube stuff, and maybe there'll be like things like just removing a background from an image, which would just take one step in Photoshop these days. But I'd use like five different apps and just do loads of different things just to get to the end result. And that thing is something that I think is quite interesting, because a lot of people come to me and be like, okay, so how do I learn design? Or like, or I want to started to learn design. What course did you take, or how did you get started? And I'm always just like, well, I have no idea how I learned design.
Yeah, just happened.
It just happened, yeah.
Well, if you're good, you're good. And if you get the job done, that's what matters, you know. And it's interesting too, because I often find that a lot of self-taught people are often the ones that actually do really well. And so, since you were self-taught, you're obviously becoming really good because you care enough about it to learn on your own time.
Hmm.
You didn't have the resources. I actually took digital media back in high school, so we had access to the Adobe suite, and I
Nice.
was really lucky to experience that. But I don't use Adobe now, so it's kind of funny. Yeah. So, what else besides the like Skillshare courses and self taught on YouTube videos did you do to learn more design just by practice?
Yeah, definitely practice is the number one thing that led me to
Mm-hmm.
get better at design. And other than that, it's just a case of whenever I design stuff, I look at inspiration. So I'm sure you're aware of places like Dribble and Behance, which like, essentially social media for designers, and you can just go and look at loads of different design works and just take inspiration from them. So I've always taken inspiration from a lot of other designers and just tried to incorporate that into my work. And the next
Mm-hmm.
thing is YouTube is fantastic. Like you can search for anything on YouTube and find tutorials. So I'd be in the middle of a project, I'd come up with an idea to like to do a thing a certain way, and I wouldn't know how to do it. So I just go on YouTube, find out how to do it, copy like the tutorial like step by step, and hopefully get to the end result. And that's how I kind of practice. And the iterative process is again, practice, isn't it? I'd make a design project, I'd send it to like a client, or like I'll just upload it online. I'll let people sort of see it or get some feedback from those people, go back, implement those changes, and keep going like that. One thing I'd say is I wouldn't say I've done the 10,000 hours of design,
Mm-hmm.
or like how Malcolm Gladwell says, you have to do 10,000 hours to be good at something. I wouldn't say I've done a consistent 10,000 hours over the last 10 years or whatever. it's just sort of been like whenever I get interested in design or whenever my interest in design peaks, I'll just go and do some design work. And that's how it's been. So it's been a bit on and off. I'd say
Hmm.
last 5 years, last 4 years has probably been the most consistent for me when it comes to design, commissioning projects, and doing freelance stuff. Um, but even then, even now, it's quite interesting because I kind of say I'm a UI UX designer by freelance, but there's no professional qualification. There's no professional thing there to say that.
I feel like that might be like the medical background for you there, where you think you have to have a degree in design to actually be qualified, but you are qualified. You, if I saw a designer and I saw someone with a degree and I saw you, but you're 10 times better skill wise, I'm gonna choose you even if you don't have a degree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting because for me, I feel one way, but everyone else wouldn't say that, and they would say, my design's great, and they would work with me. But for me, I've always felt to myself, why is this person working with me when there's all these other professional like legit designers? But yeah, it's quite interesting.
It's interesting you say that because a lot of the premise behind PolyInnovator is
There's
self-education
that.
and creating your own online education. And actually, something you mentioned there was kind of interesting too. Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours. There's a book by David Epstein called Range, where he talks about multidisciplinary people like we have on the show. And him and Malcolm Gladwell are actually friends. They actually met each other and started debating about whether or not you should be a specialist for 10,000 hours or by dabbling and kind of becoming a jack of all trades for a while and then spreading yourself thin enough to where you find what you really like and then you go full force into that. And so Gladwell actually changed his opinion based off of Epstein's findings. And it was very interesting how, depending on the kind of practice, like if you have just pure practice, 10,000 hours is usually what it takes on average, though, because it could take 12,000, it could only take 8,000. There's actually kind of some wiggle room
Mm,
there.
mm,
And then on top of that, having interdisciplinary learning skills from graphics design is always going to help with UX, but maybe you're trying to do something along the lines of designing a house. And the concepts you learn from designing a house actually help you design a better app because you
mm.
just learn how to compartmentalize. I can't speak the word. You can make compartments essentially.
Mhm.
I don't know why I can't speak that today. That's funny, but again, this the interdisciplinary thinking helps a lot too with mastery.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So there's definitely a few things actually that I take from medicine and apply to a lot of different things. Medicine
Yeah.
is definitely very process or protocol driven. As you can imagine, like when you're dealing with humans or patients, there's very little room for error, and you certainly don't want to be making errors. So there's always checklists and there's always protocols, in every surgery and every sort of medical procedure, and that's something that I've kind of taken away from medicine and applied to literally anything else in life. So with my YouTube channel, with my newsletter, with design work, I always have protocols, I always have systems. And for me, that's basically come from medicine. Like I've just realized that, they have these systems in medicine, and that means that they make very few mistakes and they always,
Hmm.
deliver a very high quality of care every single time. Therefore, if I can take away those same lessons and apply systems to my other work, such as with YouTube, I use the same templates to plan out my videos.
Yeah.
With my newsletters, I have the same sort of structure and I go through the same sort of checklist, for example, with grammar, spelling, links, and all of those kind of things before I hit publish. And all of that just ensures that I maintain I would say, a decent quality with each bit of output. So yeah, I agree with you. Like, there's definitely lessons to be
That's interesting.
taken away from any thing in life.
But it's interesting you bring up the medical field as well, and how most of the time I feel like people would see medical doctors and just lawyers as really super specialists because you have to learn for like 10 years straight.
Mm,
But I think, I don't know if it was in one of your videos or someone I was talking to was talking about how sometimes doctors are actually pretty generic, especially general practitioners who have to be holistic in a way. And one thing you made me think of is actually as a lifeguard. When I was younger, I was a lifeguard for many years. We actually had to just go. Like if there was some kind of distress, if someone even looked like they were drowning or looking like they were going to go underwater, we would jump in and try to save them anyways, even if it was for nothing, basically. And there was a saying they always said, "If you don't know,
mm.
go."
Yeah.
And it's a very simple line, but if you apply that to other areas, like, hey, there's a cute girl across the stage area or whatever you're at, you want to go talk to that person, or if there's a cute guy or whatever particular situation, sometimes you overthink it. You start making yourself more nervous.
Hmm.
But if you don't know what's going to happen, go anyways. And the quicker you get to that situation that's making you nervous, the less nervous you're actually going to end up becoming because it's going to change the situation
Yeah, yeah,
by interacting.
definitely.
Well, and one of your posts that kind of got my attention there is number 6, don't be a generalist. And I wanted to bring that one up because it was interesting how in order to become a specialized generalist, you have to find that Archimedes lever. And so, could you explain that concept for the audience a bit more? Because you know it better than I could explain it.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting. I can't quite remember where I came across it for the very first time. I think it was actually Tim Ferriss's work, where he was speaking about this idea of an Archimedes lever. And this is a basic idea that, we all have our innate sort of strengths or like innate abilities that give us an sort of unfair advantage or an advantage over other people. But then if we combine this with a few other things, then we can, start to leverage or build leverage using that. That would be very specific to us and very sort of, no one else could kind of replicate what we could do. And I think for me, or the way I kind of thought about it, was what was my Archimedes lever, and how could I then leverage this, or how could I keep improving on this to later be able to leverage it even further? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I combine this idea with like being a specialized generalist as opposed to a complete generalist. Because when you're a specialized generalist, it's much like being a poly-innovator, polymath, in the sense that you're focusing on a few different things, and you're not trying to be the best in the world at these different things, but you're trying to be somewhat decent at these things so that when you combine them together, no one else has that combination of work. No one else can do the things that you do in the way you do it. And that's where I thought, okay, an Archimedes lever provides me the ability to have leverage over other people and to build whatever I want to build. I don't know if it's like a personal brand or a startup or whatever. I need this lever, so I need to be able to leverage something. But then, what could I leverage? The fact that I'm a specialized generalist, the fact that I do a few things, but when you combine those things, no one else does that combination of work. For me, that was basically I'm studying medicine, so one day I will become a doctor. So that's one thing in my sort of specialized generalist sort of category. The next thing is design. I enjoy design.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a fair bit of design. So if I kept going with design, kept improving on my design, it would become a skill set that is pretty good or pretty something that I
Yeah.
can leverage. But then when you combine the two together, so a doctor who also designs, that's pretty special. Like I've rarely come across like designers who are also doctors or doctors who are also designers, and that has many many applications because if you look at how the world is heading towards a more tech-driven sort of world, there's far more apps, there's far more websites, and everything is generally happening online. Design
Mm-hmm.
becomes super important, right? With user experience and user interface, anything with good design immediately starts to stand out. And for medicine, that's also very important because a lot of the ways we'll eventually treat patients will be through apps. A lot of the ways patients interact in hospitals will be through apps. A lot of the sort of medical technologies that we use to diagnose patients will be through apps. So that's where I sort of started to learn a lot of UI UX in the hope that one day I would be able to leverage that insight and build a better app within the medical field. And that's why I'm sure we'll discuss later. I've done a lot of startup experiences within medtech because you kind of see where I'm going here with like everything building up to a bigger picture, which is one day I want to do or I want to start my own medtech startup or do something like that in the medical field. But then I want to have all of these different things that give me so much more leverage. Being a doctor and starting a startup is great, but then being a doctor, doing a startup, and then being also be able to design really well, that's something extra. So that's where the idea of specialized generalist comes into play for me. And that's why I wrote that article about, finding your Archimedes lever, which may be two or three things that when you combine gives you
Mm-hmm.
unique advantage over other people. And then you can use that to become a specialist generalist kind of thing.
I love that. And I think one pillar you're actually kind of leaving out is that content creation. It like you're a content creator now, and you've been spending a decent amount of time doing it at this point, and actually created a decent amount too. They say that if you make 100 episodes on your YouTube channel, that's usually when the quality starts to kick in. But even from a beginning point, I saw that like pretty early on, you started improving the quality of your videos through design, having all these motion graphics. It's farther along than I am too, which is funny because I've been at this for 3 years. So that's good on you for being ahead of that. And that's just due to your design background. And then a lot of the topics have to do with self development, but also your medical field as well. And I think also too with that whole idea of a specialized generalist, that really is just a polymath. That's what a polymath is, someone of many learnings, of deep knowledge kind of thing. But there's a lot of people who don't realize this. There's a lot of researchers in polymathy, I mean, and they're talking about the difference between a regular polymath and like a true polymath. How do you define what a polymath is? And if you look like Leonardo da Vinci, he was like a master in many different areas, whether it was science or art or war machines and just engineering, like literal master in those fields, like top 10% kind of thing. But then if you look at some other polymaths throughout history, maybe Benjamin Franklin or Nikola Tesla, they might have a master level in one or two areas, but for the most part, they are very 40% or top 25%. And sure, that's a very deep specialist, but it's not the top of the top.
Yeah.
And so they were basically expert generalists, so to speak, right? And it's a very interesting distinction between like a lower level polymath and a higher level polymath.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a article. I think it might be a Dilbert article. Can't quite remember. Um,
I think you have it linked
yeah, I
in
think it was in the
your
Specialized
post.
Generalized post actually. And that was the idea that if you wanted to be in the top 1% of anything, let's say you're playing NBA and you wanted to be in the top 1%, that's very, very difficult to achieve. But if you wanted to be in the top 25%, that's a lot more achievable. That's like a semi-professional sort of level, or maybe a little bit lower. So that's pretty achievable. So if you were to become or get into the top 25% of two things, then suddenly you're very good in that combination of two things. Like you're in the top 1% of the people that can do those two things really well, right? So that's again like how to sort of define the specialized generalist thing for me is that I want to be in the top 25% of doctors and top 25% of designers, which is easier to achieve than me being the top 1% doctor because that's very, very hard. Like you need to be incredibly smart, incredibly like research driven to be in the top 1%. But being in the top
Yeah.
25% for me, I think is pretty achievable, right? So that's where I'm going for. I want to be in the top 25% of a few different things, which means that for that combination of things, I'm actually in the top 1% because no one else has that combination of things, or very few people do. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and so for me, I think top 40 is something that's a lot more achievable for a lot of people.
Definitely.
A lot of people overestimate it, but like top 25, again, it's the difference between a polymath and probably someone who's a more expert polymath or true polymath.
Hmm.
And 25% would be that latter, and the 40% would be like the former. But it is interesting how both of them are very awesome to achieve, and then eventually I think you'll become the latter no matter what
Hmm.
if you keep working at it. But it's a very interesting discussion here. In fact, we've been going on this tangent because it was super intriguing. We're both kind of meshing our ideas together, but we haven't even touched the questions yet. So I want to dig into one of them here. So let's start off with a win. You hit a huge milestone on YouTube recently, where you hit 1K, which now it's actually 1.2K from when I last checked. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's interesting because so I don't like to like set concrete goals. Like I don't like to say, I want to get 1,000 subscribers or 10,000 by a certain date. That's never been my approach to things. But when getting started with YouTube, I did have the goal like if in a year's time I get like 1,000 subscribers, then that's kind of validations, kind of proves that, I can make it work or there's enough people that care about my work. But for me, it kind of happened in, I think, 4.5 months is what it took me to get 1,000 subscribers and about, I think that was 19 videos. Um,
Hmm.
for me, that was like quite shocking because I never thought, I'd be able to gain that many people's interest that quickly. Sure, I think there was a few driving factors towards that. For example, I was a part of Ali Abdal's part-time YouTuber Academy, which meant that I was able to connect with a few people, and that gave me an access to a community that I was able to build with, and build alongside with. And then a few of my videos seem to do really well compared to the others, so there are a few elements to it. But yeah, no, it's been really interesting to see it grow so fast. But the next step is how to maintain that momentum, or how to keep it going. But again, as I was saying, for me, it's never, or hasn't ever been a numbers game. It's always just been a consistency game. My plan was,
Yeah.
one video every single week of decent quality. And in each video, I'll try to make, as James Clear kind of says in Atomic Habits, those 1% improvements, where you're just getting incrementally better each time, which means that, over the course of, I don't know, 365 videos or whatever, you'd be 37.78 times better. So that was my sort of aim: be consistent. Whatever happens with the subscribers, we'll reassess in 6 months, because that was my sort of time post for realizing whether this was a project that was working, or whether I needed to, really
Evaluate or something like
evaluate.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been really interesting, and we'll see how it goes from now.
Well, and it's interesting too. Both of our goals were consistency based, and I think that's really cool how we both took it in the marathon in mind. Think Media is a common channel, and I took their course on YouTubing. And one of the biggest things they always say is it's a marathon, not a sprint. And some of the biggest YouTubers, I think even Ali Abdal, our mutual friend, he took almost a couple years, I think, before he popped off, or something like that. And it's just interesting how a lot of times you could be making a couple hundred videos. Like I have over 100 on the channel, and yet I only have 100 subscribers. But it's really good because I know that eventually someone's going to come across this, the algorithm's going to change or something like that, and there's enough points of entry, all these different videos that'll allow people to come in.
Yeah.
And like you said there too, you're doing a compound interest of 1% every day. And I think it actually goes faster than that, because you're going to start learning, okay, well, these videos did better. Why is that? Well, they had a better thumbnail. Okay, I can start designing my thumbnails like that. Or like on your Instagram stories, you started realizing, okay, I can change the text on my quote to be native on the picture instead of having just a pasted quote from the book. Or like, and then you added that whole SVG in the corner, that kind of thing. And over a couple weeks or so, you managed to make a better template based off of iteration, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, you mentioned that you have 100 videos, but only 100 subscribers. That kind of reminded me of one thing Gary Vee says, which is it only takes one piece of content to change your life,
Yeah, the pop
and
off.
you'll
Yeah.
never know which piece of content that is. And another thing that you mentioned is, because you have 100 videos or plus, when one thing does pop off, then there's a lot of other material for people that come by to look at, and hopefully that will make sure that a lot of people stick by and watch a lot more of your videos. So yeah, I think there's many elements to content creation. One thing is definitely consistency. Another thing is playing long-term games. So Naval always speaks about long-term games. And the other thing is realizing that it's not going to be the one piece of content that you think is going to go viral that goes viral, will be something completely different, right? So
Yeah.
that's it's three things that I like to think about with content.
I like that. And it's interesting too. Virality is so weird. I literally have been on TikTok for 2 years, and some things have gone viral, some things I have not. I remember commenting on this fitness video, since my background's personal training and fitness, and I commented about somebody's form or something like that, and it went like super viral. It's like 17,000 likes. And I don't even know how that small little comment would get that much attention, but it's just interesting how I just randomly did it. I was like, hey, this kind of made me annoyed by this. Let's comment on it. And eventually people saw it. So this, again, is a good example of that. And you were mentioning Gary Vee, and he always says do 100 pieces of content a day. And everyone always hears that and goes kind of like, okay, Gary, whatever. But there's ways of thinking about it. Like, he's not saying make 100 pieces of just like, you make 100 from scratch kind of thing. There's a strategy behind it. There's content repurposing behind it. And there's also the execution of it. How do you go about doing it? How do you break it up? You could take your video on YouTube that you made and then you could repurpose it for IGTV, make it vertical, or chop it up into a small format, which I think I saw you do at least once there. And it's just interesting too how, if you think of it differently, like repurposing, but also translating. There's a lot of markets around the world, like Brazil and the Asian countries, and even some in Europe too, that don't get as much content. That if you can translate into those languages, like Slavic languages, for example, where people don't necessarily get as much content in that area. I know Portuguese is doing pretty well in Brazil.
Mm.
That you can actually get a ton of more attention, and all you're doing is repurposing in a different language.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure.
This is super cool. I like nerding out about it with you. So goals are super interesting. We were talking about how you were setting the consistency factor. What do you think would be the timeline for you to hit another particular milestone? Like you said, it's not your goal per se, but what do you think? How long do you think it would take?
Um, I guess it depends what you would say the next milestone is. For me, internally, that's 10,000 subscribers. Yeah, as I said, like goals are not concrete things that I like to keep in mind. I like to have soft goals and hard habits, and that's the kind of thing I say. And the
Hmm.
hard habit is being consistent with one upload a week. But for me, I think if I was to, reassess at a later point, I think it'll be 12 months. So I think, at the end of this year, if I'm not quite at the 10,000 mark, then I might be looking at it and thinking, what am I doing here that could be improved on? Because, if I'm going to be consistent, that means, by the end of the year, I will have put up 52 videos. So 52 videos is a lot of reps. And hopefully I'll have improved, through those reps. But if I haven't, and if growth is still quite slow, then I might be thinking, what can I do here? How can I make sure I can, continue to grow, reach more people, provide more value? Um, but yeah, it's not something that I often think about, to be honest. I kind of just focus on what's in the present. The present thing that I can do
Yeah.
is upload a video next week. What can I do next week? Upload a video the following week, and then it keeps going like that. Whatever else happens with the numbers happens.
Well, I was thinking that like maybe the milestone isn't the subscriber count. Maybe the milestone is getting those 52 videos, or maybe you want to get to 100 videos on your channel, and that will be your milestone. Again, that's a habit-based one. It's not really a matter. It's intrinsic control versus extrinsic. You know.
For sure.
Okay. Well, you're currently reading YouTube Secrets by Think Media that I mentioned earlier. I thought that was really cool. Do you think that you're going to take the course that goes along with it, and what are you thinking about the book as well?
Yeah, interesting. Because I just finished reading it a few days ago, actually, and I thought it was a really good book. Because I've already done my own sort of like research into, how to grow on YouTube, and I had the opportunity to take Ali Abdaal's part-time YouTuber Academy. I wouldn't say any of the lessons in it were novel, but it was a good reinforcement for me, and it made me realize, many people, many successful people are reiterating the same few things, which is, consistency, type of content, various parameters like click-through rate, thumbnail, SEO, all of this things that go into uh, making good YouTube videos. And I thought it was good. I would recommend the book to a lot of people. Would I take the course? Probably not, because I got a lot of value from Ali Abdaal's course.
Hmm.
And I'm going to be doing it again in the next cohort. Um, so that's where my head is at. But I'm quite interested to hear from you.
Yeah.
You said you took Think Media's course, right? What were you think? What did you think? And have you considered Ali Abdaal's course at all?
Yeah, I actually have quite a bit considered it. I don't know if I can afford it at this time, which is probably, I think, was the cost that really kept me from doing it. But I took, well, because Think Media's YouTube Secrets course came out 1 or 2 years before his, I think. And so it was pretty novel at the time, so to speak. I mean, not so much considering the fact that their other course, the Viral Ranking Academy, or not Viral Ranking, Video Ranking Academy, it was like a few $100, I think it was, and that one was definitely novel, and they kind of just distilled that into YouTube Secrets, I think. But it is interesting how all three of the courses are trying to get people to do kind of the same thing: just consistency, rank well, SEO, partner with people, collaborate, having to just literally just make 100 videos a lot of the time. Even Roberto Blake, he was saying it multiple times: make 100 videos. Quantity will come with quality eventually.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think with Ali Abdaal's course, the single line that he would consistently repeat is 1 to 2 videos a week for 2 years consistently. if you can do that, and then if you're not, somewhat successful, if you're not growing on YouTube, then let's chat. But until you do those 1 to 2 videos a week for 2 years, you can't really expect
Hmm.
anything, and that's a huge thing towards consistency, right? And I think it's difficult though, because consistency is very easy to say, like, oh yeah, all you have to do is be consistent. But then if you consider like how much effort goes into making a video, as
Making a
yeah,
video.
you'll agree with me that it's hard work being consistent every single week. So it's how do you like build in that into that consistent mindset when there are so many factors to putting out a video? You have to come up with filming points, you have to come up with the idea, you have to film it, you have to edit it, then you have to think about SEO, title, then the description, and then maybe a thumbnail as well. So many components. And the one thing that, I haven't done it for long. I've only done 19 videos. You've done it far, far longer than me. One thing that's really helped me, I would say, that has enabled me to be consistent is having systems. And I think I spoke about this earlier, whereas like, one thing that I took away from medical school was processes and consistency systems. So I have Notion templates or Notion databases where I kind of like have a YouTube funnel where I come up with ideas. Then I'll kind of just let them marinate over time. I'll come if I think of an idea, I'll write it down in
Hmm.
Notion, and then I won't look at it for some time. But then when I'm preparing a few videos for the next month or so, because I like to batch things, I'll sit down one day and film, or well, um, come up with the idea and filming points for 4 videos. Then I can go
Hmm.
and batch those 4 videos. So when I come back to Notion, I have all of these ideas, because whenever I come up with an idea, I just dump it in my YouTube funnel on Notion, and then I can pick like 3 or 4 ideas, and I can develop them a little bit further, and then further until then, I have 4 videos I can then go and record. I think having being consistent is one of those things that you can't just do without having things that will enable you to be consistent. And the one thing that enables
Yeah.
you to be consistent is having systems, having processes that are very
Having
regular.
Notion.
Yeah, having Notion.
Well, and it's interesting too because there are other tools, and I tried 70 plus different project and task management tools out there. I think there was actually something you were talking about how to-do list or to-do list was like working well for you, but you tried like 4 or 5 other ones because the gurus are all saying you should. But like I tried them because I was trying to find different layers of extraction. I wanted to have a layer here, database here, layer beneath that, that kind of thing. And for some reason, most of those tools only gave you 2 layers, and that wasn't enough for me for the way my brain was thinking about it. And we were mentioning Gary earlier, and for some reason, that line of him saying you need to create 100 pieces of the content every day just stuck with me. And I think I'm not gonna obsess over like the 100 pieces per se, but I'm gonna obsess over the content of being able to spread it across an omni-channel presence, being able to basically spread the tentacles around, so to speak. And it's interesting how if you make a strategy and find a tool like Notion that can do it, like you were saying, how you have like a funnel or the second brain, as you would say too. You have like input, then slow burner, then output. I think it's really neat. And it's super interesting too. By the way, HubSpot has an idea generator where it's for blog posts, but you can often use those blog post generators for YouTube ideas as well. And so I used that to make a whole list of just like 700 ideas for not just that, a couple other tools like it too, and Answer the Public or Quora, going on there and seeing what questions are being asked. And I was able to make 700 ideas for YouTube, and that's my main series, the Omni content, which I thought you would be like. I think afterwards we might nerd out on Notion and show each other templates. I thought that'd be kind of cool.
For sure. Yeah. And one thing that I've kind of like thought about is with my newsletter, some of those, or well, some of the witty thoughts I have, I kind of think if I flesh this out a little bit further, then it could be a standalone video. And do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Do I turn each of my newsletters into videos? Because then that would be pretty easy for me to do, because if I've already written the newsletter, the bulk of it is there. Maybe I just do need to do a little bit more research, add in a little bit more of an introduction, a little bit more of a conclusion, break it up into chunks, and then film it as a YouTube video. Um, and then I think there's a discussion I was having with Ali actually, on his course, and should we, or it was a question that many of the attendees had on the course. should we repurpose our content from other sort of platforms? A lot of us already had blogs and websites and a lot of articles on there. Should we repurpose those into YouTube videos because that would be a pretty easy thing to do? And the one thing that kind of stood out to me was whatever you're trying to repurpose. I think you mentioned this earlier as well. Has to be pretty, you know, yeah,
Quality.
it has to be pretty, sort of adjusted to the platform. It has to be platform specific, right? You can't just take a article and then talk that and that would become a video because that wouldn't really work. The same way if you had a video, you can't just translate that or just use like a rev.com or whatever to get the words from that video and then just upload that as an article. That still wouldn't work because the way you write for a blog is different to the way you speak in a video.
Transcribed, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And the kind of post that you put on LinkedIn or the kind of post that you put on TikTok or the kind of post you put on Instagram is different to I know what you put on Facebook and Twitter. So repurposing is like fantastic, but it's being able to make it domain specific or platform specific and make sure you deliver in a way that's suitable for that platform, right? And so yeah, one thing that I'm considering in the future is because I've got all of these article ideas down and some of them seem to resonate particularly well with my audience, maybe I'll turn them into videos. But we'll see. We'll see.
Well, you know what's interesting is that when people say content repurposing, they often think with videos first. So, like this interview right here, the first thing I'm going to probably do is obviously put it up. I cross post it across the different platforms. Eventually, I'm going to find a way to put it on IGTV, but the links are usually too long for IGTV, so I have to chop it up. But regardless, I'm going to be repurposing that way. And a lot of people chop up into little clips on Instagram and put it on Twitter, and you change the format from square to the whole rectangle for different places and tag it differently, tag people differently, that kind of thing. You make it contextual to the platform, of course. But people start with the video, they cut out the audio, make a podcast, or polycast in this case, and then they transcribe it. And they actually just leave it, usually as a transcription, with the maybe timestamps and stuff like that, and that's their article. I don't like that so much, and I don't think you like that as much either, because it's one of those things where we're writers. We want to have a nice formatted article, which is interesting because I'm going to be transcribing these here soon, so I'm wondering how I'm going to go about doing that. But one thing I thought was interesting is that you and I, since we started with blogging first, that's how we end up seeing that first. And so my actual main series, I think you'll be interested in, is the Omni content, like I mentioned. It starts with a blog post. I turn that into a slideshow before, but I'm not sure if I'll keep that step. And that way I get the SEO from slide shares, which is surprisingly useful. And then I use that slideshow and the prompts from the article to make a video. I cut the audio out and make it into a polycast. And so it was a nice way to really get that repurposing flow and kind of keep it into like almost like a Kanban sprint where it's this stage, this stage, this stage. But it is interesting how, like you said, you have to format it differently. And I just use the article more as like talking points and I would expand upon it verbally, not necessarily write it down and prepare. So I noticed you tried your hands on 3 different blogging platforms, Medium, Substack, and Ghost. What are your thoughts and why do you still use 2 of them separately?
Yeah, good question. Because I think Medium you can kind of immediately rule out from this
Yeah,
sort of thing.
it's gross.
Um, but I'll explain why I started on Medium actually. So there was this idea that I would start making some sort of passive income, or my writing would earn me some sort of generate some sort of income. Um, and that's where Medium came into the picture because on Medium you could have your things published in publications, and that would earn you some money. So when I first started to write, which was actually only at the start of 2020, so I think it was about February or March of 2020, I wrote out my first ever article, and that was on how I got into coding or how I learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and what kind of advice I would give to people getting started. And I just wanted the least friction way of publishing that, and Medium was just the choice for that. And then after some time, I got some people telling me that they couldn't actually access my Medium article because it was under a paywall, and it was just not accessible to a lot of people unless I gave them my direct link and then they could access it. So for me, it was like, okay, that's a like a red flag for me because I want my content to be completely accessible, completely free to for people to read. So I didn't then do any sort of regular articles for some time because I was like kind of working it out. I was thinking, okay, so I want to write. I think I want to write regularly, but I don't want to use Medium. So initially, or like the natural progression was to think of newsletters and how I would write my newsletter. Then obviously I considered things like MailChimp, Review, ConvertKit, Substack. And the reason why I went for Substack is this is going to be a varying opinion. I think, some people agree with me or some people might not. For me, the design on Substack and the simplicity was just, it was nice. It was easy to use. There was very little friction in getting to start writing.
Yeah.
And publishing was also very simple. You could schedule posts. It had its own built-in sort of sign up page for like any newcomers. So it was all there and it was all very simple and there was very little effort on my behalf. So I got started on Substack. And I started my weekly newsletter in April of 2020, and that's how I started regularly writing. So even at this point, I didn't have my blog or my website, um, which is, as you mentioned, on Ghost. All I really had was like it was a card website at that time, CARD, card.co, where you can build like very, very simple sort of landing page type websites where you can have your links to your social media, maybe a little paragraph about yourself, and maybe a little photo, nothing more than that. So I had a card website at that time, plus the Substack. Then I had, the Substack embedded into my card so people could sign up as well. But I thought, from an SEO perspective, I know better than this, and I know that this isn't great. Long term, I don't want to be having a card website. And also in terms of like speed, this is one thing I'm quite picky about. If a website doesn't load fast, I'm very unlikely to stick by on it. So I wanted a website that would load very fast and would enable me to build out my SEO and have wider content, be able to grow it into something a little bit bigger. So that's why I was like, okay, I need my proper website now. So I looked at things like Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, all of those kind of things. I didn't really like those. I think Squarespace and Wix for
Yeah.
me was a bit, designer to designer, it was a bit limiting. So WordPress, I considered it, and I thought, if you get a really good theme going on, it could be pretty good. WordPress is decent, but it was still a little bit old school for me, and I had bad experience with my sort of previous startups where I was managing WordPress sites, and I didn't really enjoy it that much.
Yeah.
The back end of WordPress is just not nice.
Oh, it's horrendous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I'm trying to like hold back my mouth, so to speak, because I have, yeah, I get you. Please
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, it's really not a nice experience. So I was like, okay, I need something great. And then I was looking at Ali Abdaal's website. If we keep mentioning Ali Abdaal, famous productivity YouTuber for anyone who might not know. But Ali,
I had him on the show, so
oh
you
yeah,
probably
yeah,
know
I
from
was
there.
actually having a listen to that as well. Yeah. Um, so I was looking at Ali Abdaal's website, and it was from Ghost. He was hosting it with Ghost, and it was a Ghost template, and it was loading really fast. It was really,
Cause yeah.
designed really well. So I was like, okay, this is what I want to use. I want to use Ghost. So I just hosted it myself to, make it a cheaper thing for me. Uh, I think it cut down the cost from like $36 a month to almost like $5 a month. So I was like, fine, Ghost self-hosted is the way to go. And then I had to get my articles from Substack and just copy them over to Ghost. That's all I did. It's very simple. I haven't done anything smart. I haven't automated any of this. I wish I could. I
There,
don't know how
I've
to.
done it. You can't really automate it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. So at this point, because Substack doesn't have any APIs or anything, it's impossible to do that. So yeah, that's how I got with Ghost. I hosted my website on Ghost, used to go
Hmm.
CMS, and so now I have Substack where I'm writing my weekly newsletter. Then each week I would just take the article, shove it in Ghost, and that would be that. But yeah.
So that's why I was wondering, because like if you're, I didn't know when I saw your two blogs. I didn't know at one point. I thought I heard in your videos that you said you were gonna, or maybe one of your posts that you were gonna do longer form on Ghost and then keep it short on the Substack. So I didn't know if I should read both websites, but I ended up just kind of sticking with just one and reading through that one. So I didn't know if you would be the same post or not. But I saw the titles; they seemed the same, so I just kind of assumed that they were. But I was wondering why you still had Substack around if you were moving to Ghost.
Yeah, interesting because Ghost, for anyone that doesn't know, does have its own built-in sort of mailing list and mailing features. So as you say, I could just move entirely over to Ghost and it would make a lot of sense. But for me at this stage, I know Ghost are really trying to improve their newsletter features and improve their analytics. But for me at this stage, Substack still seems a little bit superior to me in
Mm.
terms of newsletter features and just the way the design of Substack is just a little bit more pleasing to me. So that's why I've kept it on
Hmm.
Substack. And I think the long-term goal would be to move over to a single platform and just keep everything under one hood because, as you say, that would simplify things and make things a lot more easier to manage. But I
Yeah.
haven't quite decided when I'll do that. I think I'll wait till Ghost improve their newsletter
Yeah.
features and let them flush it out a little bit more, and then I'll decide whether I'll move.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think that would be the reason, so I like that. And just for context too, I had used all of them. I started out on WordPress, couldn't really figure it out, so I moved to Wix. And as a designer, actually Wix felt like it was more of a open door. Like I could do a lot more with it. You can drag around, do a lot of different things. But then I realized very quickly it's limiting in very many other ways, and it's also pretty expensive too. And Squarespace never interested me. But I moved over to Medium at that point. This is when Medium was early on, and you mentioned the paywall, and I just wanted to touch on that because you don't have to put it on the paywall. You can make it free. But here's the deal. Over the past year or so, they've been doing a lot of changes. And one of them was that if you don't have it behind the paywall, they don't really share your article at all
Mm,
on their platform. And one of the biggest reasons why most people used it is for the virality sake on there. Like you can go viral on there and get a ton of traffic. And if you don't make it behind the paywall, you can't really have that capacity anymore. Plus, I always hated as a user having to pay for it. Like I like Medium articles, I read them, but I don't necessarily want to pay for it. This is my personal preference, and it's just one of those things where they kept forcing it down my throat. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take my 100 posts that I have off of here and move it somewhere else. So I took Substack posts, Medium posts, a blockchain social network or like blog post platform, airtext.xyz if you're curious, and then WordPress as well, and all these four different platforms all into one. Now I moved them all to Ghost, which I thought was interesting. So I know the pain of like transferring over. You're kind of alluding to it earlier. It's like Substack to Ghost is a pain.
nice, nice. Yeah, that's interesting. And so, do you have your mailing list on Ghost as well?
So you know what's interesting is yes, technically I do because I actually went with I thought about doing the self-hosting for Ghost because it is a lot cheaper. But part of my issue with WordPress wasn't just WordPress's like horrendous backend that had a lot of meta work. Like you said, it was like it's very just distracting and you couldn't ever get to
Mm,
writing,
yeah.
and so it always kept me from doing my writing. But also the self-hosting aspect, like getting the IP addresses and the name servers to point in the right direction, all those different things you have to deal with when it comes to the networking and the IT aspect with a self-hosted site just frustrated me. I know it. I'm a techie. I actually studied the Network Plus for certification, and it's like I don't really want to be dealing with this when I'm trying to write. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair
And
enough.
so yeah, I don't know what my point was there, but my point is I have it on Ghost for simplicity's sake, but I also have Automizy, which is another tool
I see.
that I have an email system in.
Nice.
Yeah. So I love how even though you just started out for the most part, you're mentioning consistency is your big goal. I love how you had a very consistent, almost omni-channel style, like what I was trying to employ there as well. With the also with the deep blue and yellowish tan, both of those contrast well in your styling. I love that. Color is always a very something that fascinates me. And so, what inspired your branding scheme?
Interesting. So, I think because I've always been a designer, I knew when I wanted to create my content and sort of build out my personal brand that one element or one strong element in it would be the design, and I would be consistent with this. So obviously, I had to work out what my design would be from the get-go, so I can have a consistent sort of coloring, branding, and all of those elements um, that go into how I came about the sort of beige color that I kind of use as my, I think it's my pillar color, like the main color that I use
Mm.
for all my drawings, all my visuals, all of my Instagram stories, whatever. I always use this beige kind of color. Um, how I came about it, absolutely no idea.
That's how the best ones are. I think the same thing happened to me. Like I don't know how it happened. It just kind of happened serendipitously.
Exactly, exactly. So I think I was just like messing around, creating my first ever sort of visual for my newsletter, and I picked that color, right? for my new so the way I design my newsletters is I have an accompanying illustration, which is just a simple drawing, and it's like the same theme as whatever I'm talking about in the newsletter that week, and I'll draw something just to go with my newsletter. I thought it's just a nice touch to do that. So when I drew my first ever illustration for my first ever edition of my newsletter, that's the color I picked, and naturally that became my color throughout.
Yeah.
And then that's just how I've kept it. You mentioned the blue sort of highlights or blue underlines and stuff like that. Again, I think because I picked that beige, the when you look at color psychology and like how design works, two colors that often contrast themselves really well is blue and yellow. So beige and blue also contrast themselves really well. So because I had that beige as my main color, naturally as a designer, I thought, okay, the highlight color here is going to be blue. That's how I went with blue, and that's how that came about, and that's how that stuck about. I think it looks nice.
Yeah.
I've tried to subtly change elements of it. So for example, the blue I'm kind of like fading out a little bit to. So initially I had like this really vivid kind of blue, like if you consider the RGB scale, not very far off the RGB scale, like a very standard sort of blue. Um, then I kind of changed it to a more subtle, nicer looking pastel blue. And then eventually I kind of removed that blue underline or this blue element that I had in all of my drawings. I got rid of it because I wanted it as simple, as clean as possible. So now it's just a beige background plus an illustration for every bit of my newsletter, every newsletter article. Um,
Hmm.
and I think if you look back at like some of the stuff that we've spoken about, this is evidence of my iterative process, right? Um,
Yeah.
because I'd been doing this newsletter for like 40 weeks, I think now. I think after about 20 weeks, I looked at it and thought, how can I make my designs better? How can I improve this? How can I iterate this? And then I didn't iterate it immediately. I didn't like make drastic changes. I made slow changes, so it's a very gradual change. But now it's in a place where I think it looks nice for now. But even this, I'll look back at it in 3 months' time and think, okay, now this is a bit outdated. I want to change it even
Yeah.
further, and I want to keep changing it, right? That's the most important thing with design, and that's one thing that I want people to know is design is an iterative process and it has to continuously change because design trends change all the time. What's in trend now is not going to be in trend in 6 months or a year's time. So
Yeah.
if you don't iterate your design work, you'll become outdated or your work will become outdated very quickly. So whilst I do have those colors which are beige and blue, and that's going to be permanent throughout because I want consistent branding. The actual design itself is going to iterate, it's going to mold, and it's going to change over time because I want to stay on top of design trends. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I will say I'm looking at your blog letter right now, and I'm like, okay, that blue line is distracting. you know, I do like it though. I think one thing you got rid of though is your little Yath signature in the corner. I think that one was a nice
yeah.
touch. I
So
think you should.
again, that's very subtle. So if you look into the article itself, it's there. So if you click on any article, the thing is there, the signature in the bottom left, bottom right corner. But I got rid of it on the thumbnails and on the sort of cover pages because on the cover pages, the way the crop works on Substack is that the signature will get slightly cropped out, and therefore it
Hmm.
doesn't look as aesthetically clean in the thumbnails. So I got rid of it in the thumbnails, but kept them in the main article. So again, that was a very subtle thing for me as a designer. It didn't really make sense
Yeah.
to just use the same thing. I just wanted that, although it's a very tiny thing and most people might not even recognize, for me it was like a big thing, and I just had to make sure it looked nice on all of the different
It was
bits.
that designer's eye that was bugging you, so to speak. I get
Exactly.
it. It's interesting too, because like the hex code for my main red, I think I remember the old one being just a little too vibrant for me, and I changed it by a couple different digits, and it made it a bit duller. Because I wanted red because it's more powerful, it's more attracting to the eye, and that's why I wanted to have it. I wanted people to see it. Like I'm glad that you're wearing red for the show. I appreciate that. It's a nice little touch to make this more cohesive there. But it's one of those things where I made it just a little bit duller because I didn't want people to see the red and think negatively of it. You know what I mean? But like some people thought it was too much red and too much black, and so I started adding the gold and the white in there to try to complement the colors, so to speak. So I love having these kind of nerdy discussions on design. Well, and something we both adore is Notion. And I think that's really interesting as well, because we were both talking about templates earlier. Templates are a godsend, I tell you what. Being able to like do the same kind of process each time, and I'm curious to see what yours is more about. How do you like to use it best? What is your best use of Notion?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I would say is I use Notion as basic as it gets, or like I I haven't like quite dived deep into Notion for me to be able to say like, oh yeah, I use all of these databases, I've automated all of these things, and it's a very intricate process. It's actually quite a basic process, but it works for me and it works incredibly. So that's what I'm going to stick with. So you mentioned Kanban boards. That's my main use for Notion. I love using Kanban boards in Notion. Um, and a secondary use that I have or like for Notion is for sort of journaling and building out my second brain and just keeping notes and tabs on loads of different things I was reading. Notion has this fantastic thing where in Chrome you have the extension, which means that you could
Yeah.
any article that you're on or any tweet, you can just click on it, you can save it to your Notion database, and I think I have it as like a page where I say this is the good stuff. It's like good stuff, um, and then that's simple. These are good things, so
Yeah.
I'll call it the good stuff. And then the way I use that is when I'm writing my articles or my newsletters. Each week I make one recommendation, and often these recommendations will come from these things that I've previously consumed and just saved in Notion. So Notion for me is all about making everything else easy or everything else easy to do. When I'm writing my newsletters, because I have all of these things that I previously consumed and really liked in one place, I can just go there, pick one thing, and have it as my recommendation for my newsletter. That means that process of figuring out a recommendation each week is about 2 minutes, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to if I was genuinely thinking, okay, what should I recommend this week? Then that's gonna be like a half an hour thing where I'm like, oh, is that good enough or should I recommend something else? But here I know because I've saved it, I've deemed it as being good enough for me to like revisit in the future and something that I would share with other people. So it makes things easier for me. The next thing is we talked about before, Kanban boards and templates. So with YouTube, that's my biggest use case for Notion. I use it a lot for my YouTube. And the way Kanban boards are, you have different columns for like uh, how far or what stage in the process you are with a particular piece of content. So for video ideas, I just have one list which is uncategorized. It's just a empty list, and it's just full of bunch of any old idea. Like even if it's a really terrible idea, even if it's like, oh, this is a really good idea, I'm going to do it one time. Everything goes in that column first, and then the next column is called flesh out for me. So I've named it as flesh out. And any ideas that I put in here, I have to flesh out, or I'm going to do it very soon, or it's in my pipeline now. Yeah, as soon as it goes into flesh out, it's in my pipeline. Until until it's in the flesh out stage, it's not in my pipeline. It's just random ideas. So that all of my ideas go into the flesh out column. Then the next stage is I call it the filming points column. That's where I will consolidate ideas and I will come up with the filming points, which I can then take to film and edit. I have an uncategorized column, I have a flesh out column, I have a film column, then I have a edit column, and then a publish column. So that way, um, I think the way you describe this is you call it parallel processing. It means that you're not just working on one idea at a time and then you move on to the next. You're actually working on many ideas at the same time, and that makes it a lot of more of an efficient process when you're planning content. So I think my biggest use case for Notion is for that purpose. And then I do like simple stuff, note taking. I do the bulk of it in Notion, whether it's for medical school or otherwise generally. Um, I don't do much task management. I know a lot of people use it as like their life OS and have all of their tasks. Yeah, yeah. I'm a big fan of people that use it as like life OS, and I've always wanted to learn. Yeah, one person we'll both agree with is like August Bradley, who's a
Yes.
fantastic sort of Notion
Love him.
expert, and he has this method. What's it called?
Pipes, pillars, and vaults.
Exactly, exactly. So that's one thing that I'm trying to learn more about and try to see how I can use Notion um, for its full capabilities. But this is one thing I guess I would say for all platforms. I think there's a lot of hype or a lot of interest for a lot of people to say that, oh yeah, when you're using Notion, you have to use it for these things, and you have to do all of these intricate things to get the most out of Notion. But for me, it's more like whatever tool I'm using, if it works for me and if it gets the job done for me, and if I use it in an efficient way that, I think is great for me, then that's fine. That's fine, right? I don't have to be doing all of these like super intricate things with Notion or Todoist or whatever I'm using. And yeah, that's how I use Notion, pretty much.
It's it's interesting because you were talking about the input in the Notion web clipper. I don't know if I stole this from Ali Abdal or Thomas Frank, but they talked about this idea of a resonance calendar. So something that resonates with you and you put it in there. And essentially that's just the input, and if you like it, if you saved it, it's probably good enough to go back to or share it with someone else, that kind of thing. And eventually that goes into the kind of slow burner process. And okay, some of the ideas might bubble up. This particular article really sparks an idea in me. I'm going to make a piece of content about it. Something like that. I think that's August's philosophy as well, where he wants to be able to keep things moving through the pipes, so to speak. Did I share with you the Notion OS playlist I made?
I don't think so, no.
We both love August. I love Ali. I love Thomas Frank and all these different YouTubers. Plenty of other ones as well. I actually created a playlist that like just consolidates all of them. So I kept losing track of where I was on August's basically channel. I kept watching all his videos. I kept losing track of where I was, and so I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna make a playlist,
Nice.
and so I'll put that in the description for people to watch as well. I think it's super useful because you can kind of make your own OS, like you were kind of saying there, if you want to. But there are certain videos that were very simple. The guy learned how to make a menu in Notion, where you take the heading, you make it the biggest heading you can, you get emojis. When you put them in there, the emojis become bigger because they're in the heading, and then you can put the emojis as a hyperlink, and essentially you have a clickable menu for things you want to get to quickly,
Nice, yeah.
which is really neat. All right, so as a final year medical student, how have you been able to balance your studies, your work, and obviously your online content creation?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this question because this is the exact video I was filming earlier today. It's going to be the next video on my channel, actually, how I manage my time between these various things that you nicely mentioned. Um, yeah, so I guess I could go through the entire video and talk to you in much detail, but um, in summary, it's having so firstly, it's two principles that come to mind, and then two processes. So let's talk about two principles that really help me to manage my time. And that is basically Pareto principle and Parkinson's law. So, I'm sure you both know, or you know both of these, and a lot of people know both of these. They're really, really popular sort of things. Pareto principle is the idea that, 80% of all outcome or 80% of all visible results come from 20% of the efforts. And the Parkinson's law is, sort of work expands to fill the time that you give it. So when you look at these two things, and when you look at creative work, when you look at medical school, one thing that kind of I use in a lot of depth is Pareto principle for medical school. Um, when you look at hospitals, when you look at patients, when you look at just generally how the healthcare system works, it's always these very standard cases or these very frequent cases that come up the most, or conditions that are, bread and butter almost, like these are the most popular things that, always appear. And then you have the very rare conditions, which 1 in 1,000 people might have, or you might come across it maybe 3 or 4 times in your entire career. So the way I
Mm,
focus my medical school revision, my medical school studies, is I focus on these really um, popular or really frequently occurring conditions. And I put my time and energy into knowing those inside out because for two things, when I'm a doctor, those are the things that are going to come up the most. So if I know how to treat those, if I know how to investigate those, then that's going to help me be a good junior doctor. Secondly, you call this like high yield content. These are the stuff that's going to come up most in the exams as well. So by revising these things in more detail, you're actually doing yourself a favor in many, many components of medical school, not only just your placements, but also exams as well. And then finally, the rest. So the finer stuff, the rare conditions. Yes, whilst those might come up, they come up so infrequently that if you didn't know about them, no one is ever going to say, "Why don't you know about this?" Because they're rare. They're like super rare. So when you apply that to medical school, and when you think about medical school in the Pareto principle sort of fashion, it actually becomes really easy to study for medical school because
yeah.
there's only set number of conditions that come up all of the time. And you could probably limit that to about 100 different conditions across all of different specialties. And then when you're only learning those kind of things in detail, it's super easy to do that. And that's how I go about medical school, and that's how I make sure that with medical school I'm not spending hours and hours head deep in books and like really revising
Yeah.
very hard. I focus on the core things and leave the rest out basically. And that doesn't hurt me in too badly. It would hurt you if you were going for like top of the year, if you were going for those gold medals. Personally, no particular interest of mine to achieve those things. As long as I'm in like the top half of the year, I'm pretty happy with that. So that's how I take medical school. I take an easy approach to medical school.
But
Secondly,
it's wise.
yeah, it's fine. Secondly, is Parkinson's law, right? This is that time work expands to fill the time that you give it. So let's say I don't know, you need to
These episodes
yeah
right here. I expand forever like time we give it when so that kind of happens. But when someone gives me an hour time limit, I have to make sure it's done in an hour.
yeah, and I'm sure you would just keep it sort of more to the point, more concise, and you probably get through much of the same content just a lot quicker, right? Um, and that's the same thing that I like to think about when it comes to anything that I'm doing, whether it's creative work, medical school work, or whatever. And I think a good example of this is like replying to emails or replying to a bunch of emails. It's very easy to say, okay, I'm going to give myself half a day to reply to all of my current emails, get to inbox zero or whatever, what kind of whatever inbox management system you have to reply to emails. But if you give yourself a lot less time, I'm very confident that most people get the emails done. Because with emails, it's very easy to procrastinate between emails, between different bits, and just expand your work so as to just fill it with procrastination, fill it with fluff, and not really get much done. So I always try to limit the amount of time I give for certain tasks. This way, I make sure I get it done really quickly. A recent realization that I had was actually filming my YouTube videos. So I'd always block out 2 hours to film a video because I'd always think to myself, there might be problems that arise, there might be the lighting issues or something that I need to fix or audio issues, therefore I need to give myself 2 hours. And so yeah, each of my videos would take those 2 hours. I would fill up that time and I would think, okay, I've been really productive here. I gave myself 2 hours and I got the video done. Therefore, I've made very good use of my time. When you apply Parkinson's law to your work, you can cut down on hours. So whereas I was giving myself 2 hours, I decided one day, actually, you know what, I'm only just going to give myself 1 hour and see how that goes. And, very unsurprisingly, I got the videos done. It only really
Yeah.
took me 1 hour, but I was giving myself 2 hours all this time because I thought, somehow I needed that extra time. And because I was filling that time, I thought, I'm making productive use of this time. But whereas in fact, in reality, all I really needed was 1 hour. And it took me that realization of just cutting down my time and forcing myself to do it in a shorter period to realize that, I was giving myself the wrong amount of time. So I guess if you were going to apply Parkinson's law, the best way to do it is do something, time yourself, and then reduce time from that. Let's say you time yourself writing an article and it takes you 3 hours. I would say give yourself 2 hours now and see how you can get it written in 2 hours. And I feel like most people would be able to write it in 2 hours. If they can write something in 3 hours, probably write it in 2 hours. And that's how I use Parkinson's law to manage my time. Um, so yeah, it's those two principles that really help me to like kind of manage my time, where I think of Pareto's principle and Parkinson's law. And then there are two processes that I like to use. The first thing is time blocking. This is something that I've only recently started doing, and I think it's when I read the book Flow by
Mikhail
Mihai, yeah,
Chertovsky. Yeah.
yeah, very
It's a hard name to
hard name.
pronounce. I've had to say it many times.
Yeah. So yeah, when I read that book, I kind of like understood about this sort of flow state and how to achieve the flow state, and why achieving a flow state is important. Um, and time blocking really allows you to achieve that flow state, right? Because if you're just focusing on one task for, let's say, half a day, and that task can be quite broad. It could be content creation, or for me, it could be design, or for me, it could be medicine. Those are three pillars I have for time blocking. Um, when I block my time in that fashion, I'm not jumping across different things. I'm not thinking, okay, for this hour, I'm going to be writing a script. For the next hour, I'm going to go revise some medicine. And then finally, I'm going to go do some design work. Because when you do that, you're going to be switching between different tasks pretty quickly, and you're not going to get really into the task that doing at hand. And what happens when you get into the task, or so like get into the flow state, is you're actually a lot more creative, you're a lot more fluent, and you're a lot more efficient with what you're doing. Let's say I was
The
revi
alpha wave state is what.
yeah, yeah. Let's say you know, I was writing a article and I gave myself an hour. Maybe it would take me 30 minutes to get into it, and it will be the remaining 30 minutes there where I, write my best work. But if I then cut myself at the hour mark and say, okay, now I'm gonna go do some medicine, now I'm gonna have to retrain my brain into the medicine mindset, the medical mindset. And then when I come back to writing, it's going to take me another half an hour to get into the writing flow. So once you get into the flow, it's easy for you to just stay in that flow and finish the work that you need to do and then move on to something else. So way I time block is I'll have content creation time blocks where for a half a day or an evening, all I do is content creation. And that might be filming videos, that might be planning videos, that might be writing stuff. And then the following day, in the evening, all I might do is medicine. I don't do any content creation. I just focus on my medical school content, any exams that are coming up, any content that I need to go through. Because I'm doing the one thing for the entire evening, I really get into it and I enjoy it because I'm in this flow state. Um, and I think that's a great way to do it. I think I've come across a lot of people who I've seen in their YouTube videos, I've seen in their sort of content planning. They'll have in their calendars where they time block an hour for a task, and then there'll be another task which is completely different. It'll be like day and night, like really wildly different tasks. And I think that's just a little bit inefficient when you're switching so broadly between different things.
Well, and it's interesting too because when you're switching tasks, like you said, there's that transition time, and something people always talk about is switching between tasks, being kind of more of a dilettante or kind of putting your hands in different cookie jars is often a bad thing. But there are some things, if you're doing something that you're not in the flow state, like let's say that you are not able to be engaged enough to get that hypofrontality and shut down and get more creative, it's just normal focus. Like you're just normally working on something.
Mm.
It's actually better to switch off every 30 minutes or so, or at least switch how you're doing it, switch your approach, because your brain can't focus usually for too long for the most part. And it's interesting because as a lifeguard, like I mentioned earlier, we actually had to employ that. So we had 3 different zones in the pool, and every 30 minutes we would switch zones to maximize the focus. It's the same task, it's just in a different way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But again, the similarities are there. They're not completely day and night different tasks.
No.
Also, there is a guy named Wilson Melancelli who creates content around flow, and I thought that would be kind of useful for you there too.
Nice. I'll
And
have
I
a look.
wanted to send, yeah, it's interesting because one thing he brought to my attention that I think you would like is this idea of flow cycles. And so, just like the circadian rhythm, you're going to have different cycles of when you're more energized, when you're not so much energized. And the flow cycles might have the same thing as well. They might even pair up the circadian rhythm at times as well. So, 10 a.m., 10 p.m. are my times of the day where I'm highlighted. It's much easier for me to get into the flow cycle in those times. But the flow cycle is interesting because after you get into that state, it's a very intensive state. All the neurochemicals are coming in, flushing in, and really helping. Granted, you probably studied this more than I did even, so I'm explaining it to the audience more so in this case. But it's one of those things where there's a recovery period afterwards, and a lot of people don't realize that, and so they keep trying to push through it when they need to be resting and recovering, maybe going to go exercise or go take a nap, go get some food, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a huge concept within the study space, and particularly with students. And it's this idea of like I think they call it the Pomodoro technique,
Mm.
where you would do a task for 30 minutes or 25 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever you define it, and then you take a 5-minute break just to rejuvenate, just to uh, regain some energy. And you in these 5 minutes, you might just, I don't know, browse social media, take a break, go for a walk, just relax or whatever you do. And then when you come back, you're at this higher level again. So if you look at like uh, a graph where you're like have your efficient output, and then over time it kind of diminishes, like how efficient you are and how focused you are, it diminishes over time. So if you just study for 6 hours straight, you might just diminish very, very quickly. But if you study for 6 hours and take 30-minute intervals, you might go a little bit down, and then you come back up and go a little bit down, then you come back up and you go a little bit down. So when you do that, you actually are focused for a lot longer than if you were to just do one stint and just go through the entire thing without taking any breaks. And yeah, that's one thing that I definitely do implement it within my time blocks. I would do something for 30 minutes, I would take a
Hmm.
little break, but I'll come back and do the same thing or the same style of thing. So I'm still in the flow state, but I'm rejuvenated.
Yeah.
I think that's a really efficient and really good way that you mentioned.
Something I really agree there. I really think it's interesting because that's a micro view of things. Like, this is what I'm doing on a daily day kind of task, or hour upon hour, minutes upon minutes. And it's a very micro focus. And it's a very important thing that most people don't even acknowledge. The other thing I would say is the macro. Because I talk about micro and macro. What are you doing in the big picture? Like, we were talking about milestones earlier. That's kind of the big picture kind of thing. And one of my previous guests really brought something to my attention that I still resonate with. And I don't remember what the name of this guy is, but he takes, every 7 years, he takes a year off. And so, like, it's like a sabbatical kind of thing. Adal actually is doing this. He's taking a year off from being a doctor to work on content creation. So he's really changing it up, so to speak, and focusing on what more different things he wants to do. And it's just interesting how, when you can think about it in the big picture like that, like every 7 years, you just take a year off, go read, go travel, go on vacation, whatever you want to do, and really kind of rest in the big picture kind of way. And then once you get back into that next 7 year sprint, you have a much more energy to go at it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I think one thing that makes that approach difficult is the certain ways people earn income, right? So let's say you're a doctor where your work is predominantly shift based, and if you don't work, you don't earn. Um, then that's kind of difficult because unless you have an abundance of savings, then you can't really take those year-long sabbaticals. But let's say you're creating content online, or you're running online courses, online businesses where a lot of your income is actually passive. You
Mm-hmm.
do the work once and then you sell twice. I think that's something Jack Butcher, if you follow on Twitter, big designer, his motto, or his style of doing work is build once, sell twice. If you're in that kind of work where a lot of your income is passive, then I think you can definitely afford a lot more to take those year-long sabbaticals or periods of extended time where you're just
Mm-hmm.
doing whatever else, and then you can come back into it really rejuvenated. And I think that's one thing that I'm working towards. I would much prefer to have that style of work life balance where I
Mm-hmm.
would go ham on one thing for a certain time, then I would just take some time off, relax, come back fully rejuvenated to go again. So
Right.
I guess if we talk in the sort of polymath kind of way, the way I'm kind of building out my career or my life is so that I can have these longer periods of breaks, is so that I can have passive income sources that if I was to stop practicing medicine for 6 months or a year, like Ali Abdal is currently doing, then I would be able to sustain my living and sustain whatever else I need to do to spend money on. So yeah, that's interesting. I really like that.
Well, and I really like how you brought the polymathy into it, because I do think a lot of polymathic people like to plan their lives a lot more. In fact, that's why I created PolyInnovator in the first place, is to be the foundation for all the future careers that I wanted to do. I wanted to find some way I could actually pivot to maybe creating music, or pivot into gaming content, or whatever I might want to do down the line. I have a basis now to do it. And that's kind of what you're doing here with your own stuff as well. So I think that's super cool. So something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
So I think a polymath to me is no different to a specialized generalist. Um, and I think we spoke about this in detail earlier. For me, a polymath is someone who does maybe a handful of things, maybe two things, maybe three things, maybe a little bit more, but they're pretty good at those things, and they strike a balance in life where they're not focused on one thing forever. They're focused on these three or four things, and that's how they go about. That's what polymath is to me.
Interesting. It really makes me think, like, we did touch on it a lot earlier. I actually almost asked that question earlier, but we ended up kind of going on a different tangent. But yeah, that specialist generalist, so to speak, where you're a specialist in a few different areas, but you're also a generalist underneath it. Some people kind of say a specialist who's jack of all trades is a T-shaped, but a lot of people also talk about kind of being like an H, where you have or not an H, but more like a square. You have multiple pillars, like a bimath or something like that, then a trimath with three,
Mm.
and then polymath being three or more, so to speak. And it's just interesting how just perspective can make a big difference there too. And there's a video by Tim Ferriss that when you were explaining the specialist generalist, it kept making me think of, and I just wanted to share that with you as well.
Mm.
I just think that it would really complement the topics we've talked about today.
It might actually be this very video that got me thinking about the whole Archimedes Lever thing. I think it is this video actually. It's interesting. You should definitely link it down below.
So pivoting a bit here, I noticed that you play the Switch too, and I'm quite an avid gamer myself. So what sort of games do you enjoy most when you have the time?
Yeah, so the Switch is something that I bought at the start of the whole pandemic when everything was
Mm,
sort of closing down. When we were having a lot more time at home, I thought, I need to make my life a little bit more entertaining. So I need to get back into gaming. And I'll be very clear, actually, I'm not a big gamer myself. Like, I never have been. I always used to get like these headaches whenever I'd play PlayStation or Xbox. I'd play for like an hour and then I'd just get this sort of like headache and I just couldn't get into gaming that much. Maybe that's just my poor eyesight or something I need to get checked out.
it
Um,
sounds like eye strain.
yeah, it does. So I never really got into gaming, but I thought, you know what, I once enjoyed Animal Crossing, so I thought I'd get back into that with the Animal Crossing edition of the
New
Nintendo
Leaf.
Switch, which released a very similar time to when lockdown happened.
It
Here,
was really popular at that
yeah,
time there.
yeah. Um,
TikTok was all over it.
yeah, exactly. I think I was very lucky to get it. Otherwise it would have been completely sold out. So I got it, and I exclusively played Animal Crossing, on it. And then I got into a few other games, which mainly like they were like two. You're not your typical game type games. I was playing like Brain Book and like all of those kind of games. So I like brain training and stuff. For me, gaming is died down a little bit. I don't actively do it that much. I do it from time to time because it's always just quite nice just to unwind or just relax. Um, but yeah, it's interesting that you asked because I wouldn't say that I'm a gamer at all.
It's interesting because one thing I think kind of says the opposite is that it looks like you have a D brand scanned on your Switch, which usually people only get if they're pretty obsessed with something like that.
Oh, so this is actually the Animal Crossing edition of the Switch.
Oh,
Yeah,
special edition.
special edition.
Never mind.
Uh, so I got it because, yeah, like I said, the one game I wanted to play was Animal Crossing. Um, and when Animal Crossing came out, they made a Switch, which was the Animal Crossing Edition version of the Switch, and that's why I bought it. Um, yeah, that's interesting actually that you'd say it's D brand,
Yeah,
but yeah, I
it sounds.
understand why you say that.
That's yeah. It looked like. Well, I mean, I only saw it in a video, I think, so it's kind of from our angle. You don't play Mario or Zelda, anything like that?
I
Because
was
Breath of the
into
Wild's
Zelda
really
like
good.
back in the day. Um, Mario, I never quite got into. Obviously, with like family and stuff, you'd always play Mario, like family events, whatever. Not, but I never really got into it. Likewise with PlayStation, Xbox, never really got into it. I played all of the classic games like Call of Duty, FIFA, which tend to be the most popular games for me or like my circle of friends. So I played those kind of games, but never really got into gaming too much actually.
Well, interesting. Well, I'll move on then, because if we don't have much more tangents on that, then if you've mentioned online that your medical interests lie at the intersection of digital technologies and holistic medical care, so can you elaborate further on that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so this is really interesting. So the way I see medical care is you have doctor to patient, which is one person, one qualified physician caring for one other person. But then you could expand that where one physician is caring for a number of different people. So rather than one physician caring for one person, one physician could care for 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 1 million people. And the thing that allows for that is digital technology. So I was a part of two startups, which were both medtech startups for a period of time. One of them was involved in improving cancer care and cancer treatment for patients. So essentially, what it was like is it's like a social media platform for patients who are going through cancer treatment. And why I think that was really good, and why I think that enables better holistic care is because it's now a case of one physician being able to provide care for a lot of different people in one go through one app,
Hmm.
right? When they write advice such as like sort of blog articles or tips or tricks or whatever in these community features, it doesn't just go out to one person. Of course, it's not like specific medical advice, it's not like confidential things. It's still very general medical advice, but it's a bigger reach. And that's one thing I think technology allows for. It allows for a single physician to reach a wider community of patients and to do more with their sort of specific knowledge. Um, and that's why I've always been really interested in how you can apply technology to medicine
Yeah.
and reach more people with it. So that's why I've kind of I think that's actually from my LinkedIn where I said that I'm really interested in how digital technology ties in with holistic medical care. And the idea of holistic medical care is that you look into all aspects of their health, right? One aspect of their health is obviously the medical aspect. Another aspect of health is how health is at home, so social aspect of health, physical aspect of health, mental health, all of these various things. And apps can really help to tie all of these little things together and provide a better holistic care. Um, uh, let's look at family health, right? So I think you guys call it family health, we call it general practice, or general practitioners are the physicians that practice family health. Um, the way family health here works is typically one physician will get be responsible for about 5 or 6 thousand patients, and they would see them however often. Maybe they'll see some patients once a year because they just don't have medical problems as much as
Right.
whereas some patients they might see every single week, and it can be quite varied. So when you are responsible for 5 or 6 thousand patients, it's difficult for you to have any sort of extended knowledge of how these patients are at home, what are their other factors, um, how are they getting on with their treatments, how are they taking their medications, and all those little things that you can't really keep tabs on. I think research has shown that you can only really understand up to about 150 people. Above that, you can't really appreciate numbers greater than that when it comes to building meaningful relationships with people. And as you kind of understand, one really important thing to providing high quality care is being able to form meaningful relationships with your patients. And so, what apps allow within general practice is for patients to log their physical health, their mental health. They can log whether they're taking their medication, they can log their side effects, and they can log a lot more information. And so and this could be through an app. And so when they come to see their physician the next time, the physician can log onto a portal and they could pick up this patient and they could have a much better picture of how their life has been outside of the consultation room. And that's why I think technology has huge room to improve how holistic we can provide patient treatment. And yeah, I've always been really interested in how to do that.
Well, and I think that's actually perfectly aligned with the show too, because it's not only taking a holistic approach when it comes to the technology aspect, but also just mentality and how you approach the people. And it is interesting how holistic life is important. The book I mentioned earlier, Range by David Epstein, one of the things he talks about in there is like someone might have been having an issue with their heart, and so the heart specialist is going to look at the aortic valve, and that's where they think the problem is. But then I think they got like a second opinion and got to like a general practitioner or something like that, and they were able to see that it wasn't in the heart; it was more in the like down here towards the livers and like all the other, like other organs down there. The problem wasn't there, but the specialist only saw it in that area. That's because that's their general practice there. That's the way they focus on, and because of that narrow mindedness, like as someone who uses a hammer constantly sees everything as a nail, so to speak.
Mm.
I think that's how the saying goes, something like that.
Yeah,
And so when you can take a holistic approach, you can see the problem in a bigger picture.
yeah, exactly. Um, that's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah, so when you stretch out to the example I was given previously, if you're a doctor and you see a patient in a consultation, you only have a picture of what happened in those 10 minutes and what they're telling you in those 10 minutes. But if you could see their life in other domains through like an app, and because the patient is logging everything daily, you could have a look at what they've been like in the 6 months leading up to that consultation through a web portal, you can look at all of their data, you can look at all of their entry points and get a much clearer picture that when the patient enters that consultation room, you know what they've been up to over the last 6 months. So you can provide a much more holistic approach to care. And that for me is just a huge thing. And I really hope that, more and more practices, more and more healthcare provisions adopt technology. I think this is tough because here in the UK we have this sort of public healthcare system
Yeah,
where the
Ali
adoption
was
of
talking about that.
technology is pretty low. Um, it's getting better. There have been initiatives put in place to make it better. But one thing that I like see in American healthcare systems and see in healthcare systems abroad is that they're a lot more willing to use technology and adopt technology a lot faster. So I do hope we too also adopt technology and leverage all of that stuff that you can definitely get through technology.
Yeah, when I was watching one of your videos, I think like the day in the life of your doctor life or whatnot, and how you were, I noticed that some of the technology, even like the door scanner or the computer that you might have been using or something like that, just seemed a little bit dated to me. And I was thinking, this is a nice hospital. Why is it so far behind, so to speak? And I think that's just overall just how the country might be operating at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. I think if you wanted it to showcase technology, British hospitals are the worst place to go to have a look at technology because they use things that are like 20 years old or 10 years old in times.
It's crazy.
But that happens to be one of the things that when you have a public healthcare system, it's it's just one of those things that where things lack is probably technology.
Yeah. Well, wrapping up here, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I think YouTube is a fantastic place. Yath Prem on YouTube. That's where I am every week, publishing videos, hopefully consistently for a long term. Newsletter is again fantastic, yath.substack.com, where I write every single week. Mainly stuff on like mindful productivity and self-growth and any lessons that I've been learning. So, for example, from this podcast, I might share some lessons that I've learned from you, and stuff like that. So, those are the best places, my newsletter, my YouTube channel.
I have links in here for you already. I even have like the latest where it is like yathprem.com/links where you have like your latest video and blog post there. I thought that was pretty
Nice,
cool.
nice.
And so, what could be a call to action for our audience today? I guess taking to go check your Substack for really your YouTube channel. I think it's a pretty good one there. You probably already gave it to me
Yeah,
in a while.
yeah. A nice thing will be, go have a look at my Substack and then subscribe. No, I'm joking. I think,
I mean, that's a good call to action.
yeah, I think from what we've discussed is we spoke a lot about consistency throughout the talk, and we spoke about how to actually achieve consistency is through thinking about processes and systems. So one thing that I've kind of like spoken to my friends and peers about a lot, and I kind of encourage them to do, is think about whatever they're trying to do, how can it be done better using a system approach or a process-driven approach, and try to implement processes and systems is something that I'm quite passionate about, and I think I want to eventually teach people about as well when I figure it out for myself. So yeah, look at your projects, look at your things that you're doing on a regular basis, and see if they could be more process driven or systemized.
Interesting. I'll have to talk to you more about that actually afterwards. And then the last thing would be this is once again Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Yath Prem on the Polymath Podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It was really nice talking.